Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have another deck profile for you. This time on the Joltik box deck that has been only increasing in popularity since it was discovered or invented shortly after Atlanta Regionals, as far as I'm aware, by Sajun Park. And it has been fairly successful so far. It top-aided Monterey Regionals 2 weeks ago, and it this past weekend came 10th, I believe, was the highest performing list for the deck at Seville special event. But it was also fairly popular in day 2 in general. I know there were a lot of players that were having success with the deck at that event, and just none managed to convert quite to top 8. I think the deck is incredibly strong, though, still. I think it's very well positioned. I don't think it has a lot of, super bad matchups. Gardevoir is pretty close, close to 50-50. Polt Noir is favored. The Polt Monkey deck with no Dusk Noir is also around 50-50. And it has very good matchups in things like Archaladon. It's really well positioned right now, I think. Very aggressive, very, honestly, beginner friendly. So that's another thing leading to its increasing popularity right now, is that it's pretty easy to pick up and play. It has a fairly linear strategy. You just got to know which attackers to use at the right times. This deck is incredibly powerful right now, sort of taking, it's on the come up. I wouldn't, maybe not taking the meta by storm, but it's definitely a threat to be reckoned with, and losing to it usually feels like it doesn't leave a lot within your control, since it just sort of takes you prizes every turn, and you just kind of have to hope that they miss bosses, orders, or Crispins on your hand disrupts. Without further ado, though, let's go ahead and get right into the deck list. My list is definitely a little bit different than the standard 60 that's been around, but nothing too crazy. So, starting with the 2 Joltik, which is obviously the key engine for the deck. Jolting Charge allowing you to search your deck for up to 2 basic energy and 2 basic lightning energy and tap into your Pokemon in any way you like. Just a very consistent way to start off the game, allowing you to get your attachment for turn on a Joltik and then accelerate 4 energy to the board. Just you immediately have 5 energy into play, and then follow up in the mid to late game with your Crispins for any additional energy that you need. Joltik it was what makes the deck work. It's what you're using to power up your Iron Hands and Pikachu EX, and it's very nice to be playing an Iron Hands deck that doesn't rely so much on Electric Generator. Next, we have Galvantula. So we're just playing one of these, mostly just since we already played Joltik. It's a very solid single price attacker in general. Shocking Web does 50 damage plus 80 if you have a Lightning Energy attack, getting up to 130, and then Compound Eyes allow you to do 50 more if your opponent's Equipment has an ability. So of course, Shocking Web is going to be able to, as long as you have Grass Lightning, knock out most single price Pokemon, and then Compound Eyes allowing you to even knock out things like Mew EX and Squawkabilly. And also, because you're Grass type, you can have a weakness to knock out things like Zoroark and Charizard, which ends up also being very, very relevant. This is a very, very key attacker against any of those matchups. Zoroark, anything with Charizard in it. So eventually, honestly, a fairly powerful attacker that you probably use more than you would expect. Next, we have 2 copies of Miraidon EX. We're just using this to search out our other Pokemon. We can attack with Photon Blaster in a pinch. Typically, it's if we have a start where we need to use Tandem Unit to grab Joltik plus Iron Hands or Pikachu, or, especially in matches where you don't want to use Iron Hands as much, we might grab Joltik, Pikachu, and then, we don't necessarily always want to throw 4 energy onto our Pikachu EX, especially since if we're not going to Topaz Bolt with that Pikachu EX twice, so then we can put some energy on the Miraidon. That happens against Raging Bolt a lot, where, we Tandem Unit for Joltik Pikachu, put 2 energy on the Pikachu. We don't want to put more on it because it's just going to get knocked out by Slitherwing, so we're not going to be Topaz Bolting with it twice, but we can use set up the Miraidon as an attacker as well. But mostly Tandem Unit is just here to make sure that we can turn 1 consistently get out Joltik, plus a Pokemon to put our energy on with Joltik. And then, of course, searching out more attackers on subsequent turns as well. 2 copies of Iron Hands EX, so just allowing us to use Ampy very much. Of course, Arm Press is okay as well, but not as used in this deck as some other decks that have used Iron Hands in the past. This is mostly, we're just trying to set this up with Joltik, and then, start spamming Ampy very much against single price Pokemon 3 turns in a row, or, weave that between that and Pikachu. Very much just very, very powerful attack right now. especially against decks with Badoo, which require a lot of setup. You can usually go ahead and Ampy very much. Your opponent might likely won't have a response with some of these setup decks, and then you can very much again. So at least taking 4 prize cards with 1 Iron Hands in most games. Then we have 2 copies of Pikachu EX, our second attacker. Just for the matchups where Ampy very much isn't going to pull its weight as much, allowing us to one-shot things like Goldango, even just going after things like Fezandipiti, Archaludons, and Zoroark EX, just anything that, with 300 or less HP, allowing us to blow that up, and then, of course, that Resolute Heart ability allowing us to trade favorably by forcing our opponent to find cheeky ways to get around the ability, which a lot of decks just don't have the options for, like a Goldango without Vengeful Punch, or if we can boss around the Vengeful Punch, just has no way to one-shot this Pikachu EX, so it allows us to buy a lot of time against those matchups and just be confidently ahead in the prize trade if they can't get around it. Next, we have the One of Iron Leaves EX. So this, of course, does have use as a grass-type attacker to one-shot things like Charizard, Hydreigon, and Zoroark, but it's primarily here just as a switching card in a format with things like Sob, or if we get for Retreat Lock when we are reliant on Latias to move our Pokemon around, or if we get Itchy Pollen before our Latias EX comes down, and maybe we have like an Iron Hands with no energy stuck in the active, and we don't have a feature booster, or we have Bloodmoon in the active. Iron Leaves is just another way to get those Pokemon out of the active position. Mostly is in answer to Retreat Lock. We do want to have some switching outs other than our Prime Catcher, and having the Pokemon switch out means it's searchable with all of our Ultra Balls instead of just with our Arvens, so we don't always need to use a supporter to find that switching card, which is also very, very nice. I think that this is probably the most cuttable card in the deck. I think it's just a little bit scary in a form where we have like both, we have Wellspring for Sob, and then we also have the Maractus that's around a little bit with, that was seen in the top 8 Dragapult Monkey list at Seville's special event last weekend. So there's just some scary Retreat Lockers, and it's nice to have a couple more than just Prime Catcher as an out of Retreat Lock. And then, of course, we are pretty reliant on this Latias EX to move around the board. Things like Iron Hands have pretty heavy retreat costs. We don't really want to discard energy from our Pokemon to retreat, even if we could. And we don't always want to have to rely on finding our tools with Arven to get out of the active spot, especially if we're item locked. Then we're pretty much just Arvening for the way out of the active instead of, getting value out of something like Crispin or playing a boss. So Latias for that mobility. I mean, this is big basics deck. Latias just slots in very, very nicely. One of Lillie's Clefairy EX just have a way to one-shot Dragapult. Of course, we have Iron Leaves and Galvantula, both as ways to one-shot the other. Big Terra EX, which is Charizard, but Lillie's Clefairy is realistically just the easiest and strongest way to knock out Dragapult, which is, of course, the most relevant big EX Pokemon or Terra Pokemon to deal with that Pikachu cannot handle on its own. Next, we have Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX, just because, Joltik power is up an Iron Hands and a Pikachu, or we get 2 Iron Hands set up, or 2 Pikachu set up, but we really don't want to have to go back into Joltik to get more energy on board. We might miss Crispins or have to use bosses in the mid-game, which can result in a late game where we just don't have the energy on board to get our last couple of prize cards. So having that Bloodmoon option, just to have an easy way to take our last 2 prize cards, as in many decks, is just very, very efficient. Allows us to need so much less off of like a late game Iono. We really just need like Nest Ball Energy Boss to get like knock on Fezandipiti. Sometimes just Nest Ball Energy in general. We just need like any attack at all. Get our Bloodmoon set up, or maybe not even need an energy if our opponent goes down to like 1 prize from knocking out a Joltik earlier in the game. Bloodmoon just allows us to much more consistently round out those last couple of prize cards with a very efficient attacker. Then we're playing both Mew EX and Fezandipiti EX, which I'll talk about together because they're both here for the same purpose, just to help us have ways to draw out of cards like Iono and Unfair Stamp. Of course, Mew providing us that additional draw early game, or when our opponent hasn't knocked anything out or is playing around Fezandipiti, using things like Phantom Dives to take multi-prize turns. So Mew just giving us that additional draw option at any point in the game, whereas Fez, of course, being the much more powerful draw card out of things like Iono and stuff, allowing us to always draw 3 instead of drawing up to 3. And then the supporters, we are playing 4 copies of Arven. We just want to be able to find our Nest Ball plus Tool combo turn 1 as often as possible. specifically just to get our Joltik play off. Arven is the easiest way to just go Arven, grab our Nest Ball, grab Miraidon, tandem unit into Joltik plus attacker. So we're just maxing out the count on that because we want to find it early on as often as possible, and of course searching out things like Prime Catcher in the late game, very, very nice as well. Basically, if you save your Prime Catcher for as long as possible, and then when you get Iono to 2 or 1 near the end of the game, you don't have to just rely on drawing boss. You can also find Arven for Prime Catcher to also seal out the game, because that is typically what you're looking for on your last turn to close things out. So max out of Arven just to have those outs as much as possible, to me, is very, very key at all stages of the game. Next, we have for Crispin. We just want to, after the initial Joltik, we don't want to have to use Joltik twice. We'd rather use Crispin's in the mid to late game to set up our attackers. Also, is our way to get Pikachu set up with a metal, or set up Pikachu in one turn from only having one energy on it if we need to power up like a second or even third Pikachu EX attack. Also, our best way to set up Lillie's Clefairy. We do have other ways to set up in one turn, we'll talk about later, but this is our primary way to set up Lillie's Clefairy to knock out Drake Bolt in one turn. And just allows us to much more consistently set up like a second Iron Hands in matches where we're focusing on just using Ampy very much 3 times, since, Joltik can put 2 Lightning and 2 Grass on 1 Iron Hands to set it up completely, and then we're going to need to probably weave a Crispin in there to set up a second one. Next, 4 copies of Boss's Orders. I already talked about how important gusting is in this deck. We're really just trying to make sure that we're always taking a 2-prize knockout, especially in matchups where we're super reliant on Ampy very much. You just want to be using Boss's Orders pretty much every turn in those matchups, past the setup phase at least. And then, of course, getting around things like Vengeful Punch with Pikachu EX against Goldengo is really nice as well. If your opponent puts multiple Goldengos into play, they can only Vengeful Punch one of them, so you can just boss around for another one and play around the Vengeful Punch until you take your last 2 prize cards that way. Then we're playing just a single copy of Iono. We do have Pokégears as a way to try to find it, so just the one to have a disruption option that also, could be a hand refresh early on. It's not a dead card in our early game hands. It allows us to get a little bit of extra draw, but primarily just to have a way to disrupt our opponent. Items, we got 4 Ultra Ball and 4 Nest Ball, just the max counts to make sure that we can draw find our basic Pokemon early game as often as possible. We want, especially when we go first, we want to make sure that before we get hit with something like an Itchy Pollen, we can get our Latias and our Miraidon out so that we have the maximum setup. And of course, all of these are outs to Mew EX and Fezandipiti off of mid to late game Ionos. And Ultra Ball is helpful as well for just sitting our hand down for a restart or just sitting other dead cards out of our deck. 3 copies of Pokégear. Honestly, if you could fit a 4th, that would be fine too, but just, I talked about how important Arven and Boss are in particular to the deck strategy, and just finding Crispin at the right times too, especially if you're going for a Clefairy attack, you usually going to have to pair that with Crispin, so having as many ways to find the right supporters at the right times as possible, very, very nice. 1 copy of Earthen Vessel, so that we do have an Arven searchable way to get an energy attachment, especially for getting that turn 1 Joltik attack. 1 copy of Night Stretcher. This is a lot of lists don't play any recovery cards at all. I like having a way to get back things like Fezandipiti if it gets knocked out, or Mew EX, especially if we open it and our opponent can easily target it down in combination with something like Unfair Stamp or Iono, using something like Counter Catcher. So having just a way to retrieve those, very, very nice. Or, go for a second Lillie's Clefairy attack. We only play 2 Metal and 2 Psychic, so sometimes you use 2 Topaz Bolts and then you don't have a 3rd Metal. You need to get one back with Night Stretcher, or you prize a Metal and need to get one back with Night Stretcher. To me, the Night Stretcher is some sort of recovery card is pretty invaluable to the deck. I think that definitely has pulled its weight for me big time to just have some sort of recovery cards for all of our one-ofs or thin counts of stuff that can be prized. 1 copy of Energy Switch. So this is something that I don't see in most lists, and to me, it has been super, super powerful in every game that I use it. It's basically a free energy attachment at any point in the game, because you usually have you're usually moving your Pokemon around with Latias, right? So you're not discarding energy to retreat, which means that when you attack with something like Joltik, if your opponent bosses around it to make sure that they can take a 2-prize turn, that energy is always going to stay on the Joltik, or they might even just not knock it out. They might just hit it with an Itchy Ball or something. So you're always going to have, anytime that the Joltik survives, you're going to have that extra energy floating around. Being able to energy switch that onto something for basically just a free energy attachment onto something like Clefairy, which is, that's one way to power up Clefairy in one turn, without having to use Crispin as a supporter, which is really, really nice, being able to just like attach Psychic and then energy switch off something onto the Clefairy to launch out a Dragon Bolt. But yeah, that energy on Joltik is often just a floating energy that you don't end up using for anything else over the course of the game. Or sometimes, when you have like a early game tandem unit for Joltik plus Pikachu, you have extra energy to put on the board that you don't necessarily need. You'll usually want to attach them anyways. Maybe you just put them all on Pikachu or put some on Miraidon. But those energy aren't necessarily needed on what they're going on. So being able to just like put that extra energy into play and then move it onto something like Iron Hands later with Energy Switch is really, really nice. And then, of course, our A-Spec Prime Catcher, like I was saying, we just want to, most of the time, when we get endgame disrupted by Iono or Unfair Stamp down to like 1, 2, or 3 cards, all we're looking for to win the game is a boss, or in this case, Arven for Prime Catcher. So just turning all of our Arvens into additional outs to gust for game, very, very crucial. Stadiums, tools, and energy. I'm just playing 1 Bravery Charm. I know most of us play 2, but I've really not found a need for 2 most of the games. It's very nice to protect your Iron Hands to make it significantly harder to knock out, so you can amp you very much with it twice in a row, or we can use it to protect our Fezandipiti or a Mew-EX, and keep them out of certain ranges so that they can survive before we get Iono'd, and we can continue to use them to draw cards. However, I have not found myself needing to use 2 Bravery Charms most games. One is useful most games, but not completely necessary. Just helpful. But 2 is very rarely necessary. I'm very happy with just the 1 copy of Bravery Charm here. 1 copy of Rescue Board, and not talking about EXP share quite yet. But yeah, 1 copy of Rescue Board is just to have a Arven searchable way to get our Pokemon out of the active. Mostly on turn 1 to get our Joltik attack off. If we open something like Miraidon or Fezandipiti, whatever it may be, usually if we get Miraidon, then we can go for like a Nest Ball for Latias. But generally speaking, if we open a Pokemon with 1 prize, or with 1 retreat, and we want to get our Joltik into the active spot turn 1, we don't want to have to also Arven for a way to search for Latias. We might have Arven plus like not really anything else going on in our hand, so we might not be able to get the Latias. So just having retreat outs off of Arven to make sure that we can get our Joltik off turn 1 and then we can find Latias later is very, very important. Because we do want to get our Joltik attack off pretty much turn 1 every single game, at least every single game that we go second. 1 copy of EXP share, just another way to keep more energy on the board. That way we don't have to rely on Crispin as much in the mid to late game and can keep using things like Boss's Orders or potentially Iono if we need to. So having that EXP share, especially putting on something like a Pika on the bench when we go for MP very much. I sort of demonstrated that on the first slide of this video, where I show that an Iron Hand's the active attacking, and then a Pikachu with 2 energy on it and an EXP share, so that will receive the Metal Energy from the Iron Hands if the Iron Hands is to get knocked out. Also makes it really easy to set up 2 Iron Hands, since you Crispin onto the second Iron Hands, put an EXP share on it, and then when the first one gets knocked out, you can just move the energy over. So EXP share is just a very nice way to keep energy in play and make sure that we are able to sustain attackers at every stage of the game. And then Future Boost Energy Capsule, similar reasoning to Rescue Board. We just want a way to move that Iron Hands out of the active spot. Make sure that we are able to get that turn 1 Joltik attack off without also needing to find a way to get Latias out. That extra 20 damage, of course, can also be very relevant with AP very much, allowing us to knock out things that AP very much normally wouldn't be able to, like Roaring Moon, or even a luxurious Caped Badoo. I've used AP very much our Future Boost Capsule to knock out with AP very much. Then we have our energy. We're just playing 5 lightning and 5 grass. These are the energy that we're searching out with Joltik. We need a pretty even amount of both to set up our Pikachu attacks and our Galvantula attack. And just to make sure that we have, even if we get a few in our hand, that we still have ample energy to search out with our Joltik. Then 2 copies of Metal Energy for Topaz Bolt. We're usually only attacking with Pikachu twice in a game, even on our Pikachu EX heavy matchups, and we do have Night Stretcher to get a Metal Energy back if we need to. That is why we're only playing 2. And then 2 copies of Psychic Energy just to make sure that we have access to a Clefairy EX attack when we need it without having to worry about prizing our 1 of Psychic or anything like that. Just playing 2 copies. Also, just, 14 is a very nice energy count to make sure that we're always hitting a turn 1 energy attachment. We don't want to miss energy attachments with how heavy our attack costs are and how important it is to keep as much energy on the board as possible. We want to make sure that we have an energy attachment every single turn. Next for our matchups, first the positive matchups, starting with Dragapult Dusknoir. Dragapult Dusknoir ends up being pretty favored because a lot of lists don't play additional energy acceleration options. Some lists play, maybe an XP share or Crispin, but a lot of lists don't play either, specifically lists modeled after Andrew Hedrick's second place list from Atlanta. So we can go ahead and use the cards like Boss Orders or Prime Catcher to target down their Dracloaks with energy to prevent attacks from them for even longer, which allows us to amp very much unchecked for even longer. Also, having Clefairy is an easy way to knock out Dragapult. This deck is just not very well prepared to counter an aggressive amp very much strategy. Next, we have our Chaladon EX, which another just very solid matchup. We have the Feature Booster Capsule, so we're able to amp very much to knock out even Duraludon. They're pretty 2-prize Pokemon reliant with things like Squawkabilly and Latias, especially particularly in the Poison build. So we have a lot of things that we can target out with Pika, and of course Pika can trade very efficiently with our Chaladon, one-shotting it very easily. If they get the first 2 prize cards, it can be a challenge, but usually we should be able to get the first 2 prize cards fairly easily. Especially if we, avoid taking a knockout on single prize Pokemon. We just want to, maybe use our board to set up Joltik until we can either find Feature Booster to knock out like a Duraludon or find like a boss to pull up a 2 prize Pokemon and get our first prizes on that. I just want to make sure that the first person will take a 2 prize knockout. Next, Terrabox, another very solid matchup. Of course, they play a Pikachu EX of their own, but none of their other attackers are that scary into us. They can attack with Terrapagos, try to trade efficiently with us, but we're almost always going to get the first 2 prize cards because it's pretty hard for them to set up an attacker that can one-shot one of our 2 prize Pokemon and also gust around it as early as turn 2, whereas on our turn 2, we're going to be very consistently going in with Amp very much. With a Bravery Charm, they can try to respond to it with Pikachu, but we can just sort of boss around their Pikachu and attack with a Pikachu of our own. There's definitely not a free matchup by any means, but most of the time you should be able to set up, 1 or 2 Iron Hands and just sweep them with Amp very much, and then have a Pikachu EX on the bench if you need to combine even with something like Iono to make it difficult for them to also take 2 prizes back every single turn. Next, we have Goldengo EX. This is another matchup that can be a bit close, especially if they play Vengeful Punch and know how to play the matchup properly. They can sort of have a Goldengo with Vengeful Punch in the active and then not bench any other 2-prize Pokemon so that we have to attack another Vengeful Punch. But even then, we can set up an Iron Hand EX and just sort of go around them and amp very much a single prizer. So it is somewhat important to still set up an Iron Hands in this matchup, but you are prioritizing usually getting multiple Pikachu EX attacks off, since Topaz Bolt just trades very, very efficiently with Goldengo. But yeah, having the Amp very much option to play around Vengeful Punch, and then having Pikachu EXs pretty much sweep Goldengo if they don't play Vengeful Punch. Next, Terrapagos, primarily, this is talking about the Bouffalant build. Pretty favorable matchup. I mean, they can one-shot some of our Pokemon with a full bench and a Terrapagos attacks, but they can't one-shot an Iron Hands with a Bravery Charm. So we set up an Iron Hands with a Bravery Charm, and then, Amp very much for 2 prizes, and we just have to find one more attack, if they go for the 2-shot in our Iron Hands. We should pretty consistently be able to take the first 2 prize cards that way. It's pretty, like Terrabox, it's not super easy for them to set up an attack plus boss. If they like Prime Catcher, it can be a little bit harder, since they can go for they can more consistently get the turn 2 attack with boss, but even then we can just not bench more than maybe 1 Miraidon to set up, and then some Pikachu EXs and Iron Hands, which even with they can do as much damage as they want, but they cap out below 280, which means that if we just have Iron Hands, Bravery Charm, and then some Pikachu EXs, they can't keep taking 2 prize cards every turn. So of course we have Pikachu EX to knock out their 2 prize Pokemon, and then Iron Hands to just keep going around and knocking out things like Hootoots or even the Bouffalants themselves with Amp very much. Next, we have our even matchups, starting with Gardevoir. So if Gardevoir gets fully set up very quickly, this matchup gets a lot tougher. because they can sort of use like Drifloon to knock out an Iron Hands, especially if we don't have a second one powered up, then they don't have to worry about us amping the Drifloon, so it becomes a much safer play for them. Their deck is not the most consistent though, right? They take time to set up. Gardevoir is a deck that usually is playing from a pretty steep deficit, and if we can set up 2 Iron Hands before they really get a massive setup and just, you know, take a 4-prize lead, make sure that we have an Iron Hands in play, then they're really at the mercy of what we draw off of Iono. Which means that even, you know, that 2-card Iono, we play Mew-EX, we play Fezandipiti, we have Prime Catcher, so we have so many outs to just bossing around their Gardevoir EX one more time for those last couple of prize cards that most games, I would honestly even almost say that this matchup was slightly favored, just because of the number of games that they just really don't do that much, and you just sort of get Iron Hands set up, thank you very much for 4 prize cards, and then just set up another Iron Hands on the bench in the meantime, and then boss one more time around the Gardevoir. However, if they do get like turn 2 Rare Candy Gardevoir, which is also still going to be a decent number of games, then you do have to worry about, you know, you're going to have to go around the Gardevoir more times, you're going to have to draw better off Ionos. They might try to, you know, play around Fezandipiti by hitting things for 190 and then setting up knockouts with Adrenaline Brain later. They can even try to go for a play where they knock out like both of your Iron Hands on the same turn by using Miracle Force to set up damage on that, and then Adrenaline Braining it on the next turn. So it can be difficult sometimes to sustain all of your attackers on board, but you have multiple options, right? If they don't get multiple Munkidori set up, the Gardevoir is often going to be in Pikachu EX range as well, so that is also an option for you. It just comes down to really what you draw off their disruption cards if you keep finding your ways to get new attackers set up and gust around their Gardevoir when it's at full HP at least. Next we have the Dragapult build without Dusknoir. So the Munkidori Genesect build. Now the second place list from Seville Special Event actually didn't play Genesect, which makes this matchup a little bit better. But Genesect is what makes this matchup worse than something like Dragapult Dusknoir, because you don't have that late game Prime Catcher option, which means your ways to find your final gust for 2 prize cards in the late game are basically cut in half, maybe even a little bit less than half. And that doesn't feel great, right? Like you might already be down a boss or 2. Having to draw one of your last couple of boss multiple times, it can be really difficult. Of course, you still have Clefairy as a way to like one-shot Dragapult, but if they set up something like Bloodmoon, now you have to use Pikachu EX to knock that out, which can also be equally difficult to set up, if not more difficult than setting up a Clefairy. So the fact that they have Bloodmoon plus Genesect just presents them more ways to disrupt you in the mid to late game, more ways to make it difficult for you to take those last couple of prize cards, and that is where the problem comes into this matchup, where it isn't there as much against other Dragon Ball builds. I feel the matchup was 50-50. You are less likely to draw into your outs because they're able to make you work for it more by making you require to draw more cards or give you less outs by denying the Prime Catcher with Genesect. Next we have Blissey Munkidori. I'm close to saying this is like a slightly favorable matchup, but if they can set up like 2 Blissies both with Rigid Bands, you don't have anyone to one-shot those, so that can be pretty tricky to deal with. The saving grace here is that they cannot bench too many Munkidoris, otherwise you don't have to even worry about the Blissies, you can just MP very much 3 Munkidoris for 6 prizes. However, if they only need to make use of like 1 Munkidori, maybe even no Munkidoris, and are able to just make you work through 2 Blissey X, both with Rigid Bands, maybe even like a Hero's Cape, if they play that as their ace spec instead. I've seen some lists that play the Hero's Cape, but obviously that list is significantly less consistent than the one with Pressure Trolley, so it may not even be a concern if they're not setting up as well without the Trolley. But, you know, Blissey X with Rigid Bands are very difficult for you to deal with. You don't have good answers to one-shot them, so you really do just have to keep finding boss around other Munkidoris. The other nice thing in this matchup is that, of course, Return does not do enough damage to knock out any of your Pokemon, so you have a lot of time to find boss orders. You have more turns to work with than other decks like Dragapult and Gardevoir can put you on a much shorter clock once they actually get set up and start attacking. But sometimes they do just like set up 2 Blissey with Rigid Bands, maybe use 1 Monkey at key times to heal them off. Like you'll hit into them, and then they'll bench the one of Munkidori. Like they will only set up 2 Blissies with Rigid Bands first, and then set up Munkidori after. Especially if they go second and get like a turn 1 Turbo Energize. Turn 2, you're going for your Joltik attack, and they evolve both into Blissey before you can get like an MP very much on a Chansey, because obviously amping a Chansey is also very, very nice for you. Allows you to go ahead and get the basically 2 prizes that just are not available to you if they're able to evolve into other Blissey's first. Yeah, definitely can be tricky, but I'd say that overall, not a matchup that you have a particularly difficult time with. Just sometimes they disrupt you a lot. They tank out with Blissey, and the rigid bands can pose a problem, especially if your draws are a little bit weak in the early game and they're able to get a few attacks on you. Unfavorable matchups, we have Raging Bull. So the big problem with this matchup is that we just don't do the 2-for-2 game plan as well as they do in this matchup. Of course, Ampy Very Much is a line, but we don't really want to go for Ampy Very Much because it requires so much energy to set up, and then it just gets one-shotted, and it's only knocking out things like Hoot Hoots or Fan Rotom, which is not primarily what they are going to have in the active spot. So we're typically going to want to interact with Pikachu, which is hard to chain Pikachu attacks together. And of course, they have typically, I would expect almost all Raging Bull players to have the Slitherwing in their deck, so they're able to clear out your Pikachus very, very easily. The Slitherwing is what causes the biggest problem, allows them to basically never be thrown off their prize trade by a Pikachu EX ability. It's pretty easy for them to set up a Slitherwing with Sada, especially if they know that's what they're supposed to be doing. So it's just very easier for them to just take the first 2 prize cards and then chain those attacks from there, whereas it's much more difficult for you to chain Pikachu EX attacks together than it is for them to chain together Raging Bolts and Slitherwings. And then we have EVs. Now, this matchup is difficult mostly because of Sylveon. Of course, we have Pikachu EX as a way to knock out Flareon, and they don't really have a way through Pikachu EX's ability. We have Ampy Very Much for the early game against their Fan Rotoms, even their EVs, their Hoot Hoots. But if we have to use Joltik to set up our Pokemon, right? So if they're able to respond to Joltik by just using Angelite and shuffling our Pokemon back into our deck, it's hard for us to just keep... We don't want to just keep using Joltik to put energy back on our board. It's just not a very effective strategy. They can even just boss, if we Joltik onto a Pika in a hands, let's say, they can boss our Pikachu and then Magical Charm it, and then Topaz Bolt won't be doing enough damage unless we can play Prime Catcher, or in which case we aren't knocking out the Sylveon, or Iron Leaves to bring the Pikachu EX out of the active spot and then retreat back into it so that we can hit for 300. So Magical Charm on Pikachu EX actually can be pros bit of a problem, especially if we prize both one of our Pikachu EX, because then we can't set up 2 with Joltik. And if we set up 2 with Joltik, of course they can just Angelite us. So Angelite into Magical Charm is what causes a big problem here. Also, if they do go first and they just go turn 2 Carnelian with the boss's orders, take 2 prize cards, that's also a massive problem, right? They have a lot of ways to initiate the prize trade. If they get the first 2 prize cards, they're going to be in a bad spot. Even if they only take 1 prize, they still play Briar, right? So if they go for a 1 prize knockout on your Joltik, and then just sort of are able to find the gusts around your Pikachu EX from there, and then hit a Briar play for a 3 prize turn, there's not a lot you can do about it. So you just kind of have to hope that you can set up just 2 Pikachu EX, not bench a lot of other support Pokemon that they could target down and knock out with Carnelian, and go from there. But most of the time, the combination of Angelite, Magical Charm, Briar, and then the potential for them to just take the prize lead with Flareon, and not have to go for Angelite, Magical Charm strats at all, is definitely an issue. That's all I have for you today, though. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I think this deck is a really, really good play for this weekend in Milwaukee. It's one of my top choices. And I think that, honestly, it's being underestimated a little bit. I think that people who've played it know that it's incredibly strong force to be reckoned with. The matchup spread looks really good. But it's definitely, it's not a very skill-intensive deck. It's a deck that people don't really, which is something that people like to avoid bringing to the event. They'd much rather play Dragapult and Gardevoir. So I think that this is something that could definitely take a lot of people by storm. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, and want to check out any of my other content or my socials, the link tree will be in the description below. Have a great day.